Okay, you fans, here it is. One of the most famous corners in popular culture in American history. Okay, here we go. This was the Ahhh Rexall drugstore in the 20s and 30s, 40s possibly. And if you're at all interested, the Rexall drug chain was founded by Justin Dart, who was married to Jane Bryan, the actress, a little actress that was in Bette Davis's film The Old Maid in 1939. Okay, here we go. Here it is. The famous Hollywood Plaza Hotel, built in 1925 for you fans all over the world. Built in Renaissance revival, for what it's worth. And this is where a young 21-year-old Bette Davis arrived with her mother, Ruthie Faber Davis, on the exact date of December 13th, 1930. This is where she stayed with her $300 a week contract for 3 months with Universal Studios. She arrived on the California Limited at the LeGrand Railroad Station in downtown LA on Santa Fe Avenue and 2nd Street. And if you're at all interested, you can see a little bit of the way that fantastic railroad station looked in a film called Birthmarks by Laurel and Hardy. Okay, when Bette arrived here at the LeGrand Railroad Station in downtown, before she got to this hotel, she was waiting for the Universal representative to pick her up, and she waited and waited. And let me parenthetically add here, she was holding her dog Boojum that she came accompanied with. It was a little wiry haired terrier that she brought with her from back east, New York City. And while they're waiting, nobody showed up, so she finally called Universal Studios, furious, and wanted to know what happened, why they were stranded out there in downtown. And when the secretary found out who was supposed to meet her, and she asked, I guess he was some young kid, what he said was, he said, "I didn't see any lady that looked like an actress." Okay, that was the first of the beginnings of her troubles at Universal Studios. In fact, when she arrived there the next day, the head of production, Carl Laemmle Jr., he didn't even greet her. In fact, he came out of his office, looked her up and down, ogled her, turned on his heels and walked back inside his office and slammed the door. And then she heard later on him murmuring and saying that she has just as much sex appeal as Slim Somerville. He was a contract player at Universal Studios. In fact, you can see Slim Somerville in the 1930 film All Quiet on the Western Front. And then let me add one more little factoid. Slim Somerville was casted in her first movie at Universal called The Bad Sister. Now, The Bad Sister was played by a little actress named Sidney Fox, who ended up having a drug overdose and dying in 1936. She didn't live very long. And in Bette's first movie, Humphrey Bogart starred in that film, and Conrad Nagel. Okay, when that film was pre-screened at a theater in San Bernardino, California, where early Hollywood, for whatever reason, they used to pick that movie theater, the California Theater in San Bernardino, to test screen their films. I guess because in San Bernardino that represented more or less probably middle America, because a lot of the people in that time period were moving from the Midwest to San Bernardino. She said when she went and saw herself in The Bad Sister, she was completely and totally mortified. She ran out of there crying, throwing a fit, and she couldn't believe how they made her look like the shrinking violet, how they photographed her, how she was so docile in the film, totally unlike her personality. And when Carl Laemmle saw that film, he decided to cancel her contract after 3 months. But Karl Freund, the cinematographer who went on to become the cinematographer for the I Love Lucy show in the 1930s, I'm sorry, in the 1950s, he said she's got very lovely eyes. I think I can do something with her. But then she ended up doing 3 films at Universal, and then they loaned her out 3 times. Once to Columbia, once to RKO, and once to a private production company. And Carl Laemmle Jr., he ended up, because of Karl Freund, renewing her contract for another 6 months. They gave her bad films, bad scripts, bad direction, bad stories. And let me get back to this Hollywood Plaza Hotel. That first day that she showed up at Universal Studios, like I said, she heard people murmuring and talking about how ugly she was, how sexless she was, how odd looking she was. And she was pretty much surprised, because back east she was quite the man killer. She had a lot of men that doted on her, that were obsessed by her, and she couldn't believe that. For whatever reason, they didn't like her looks. In fact, when the Universal Studios East Coast talent scout, when he signed her up in New York City, after seeing her in a play called Solid South, he said, "It's obvious you're not the kind of person who's usually in films. You don't look like any actress I've ever seen." Okay, here you go. Here's the entrance to the former. And there it is, folks. They've ruined it completely. But this is where Bette Davis, the 21-year-old young actress, lately from acting in repertory theater all over New York City. This is where she came in 1930 with a contract that she signed, like I said before, with this talent scout named David Werner. And her mom, when she came home the next day to her hotel room, we'll never know. Too bad. At least back then they used to, by law, have to save the registers. Maybe they're somewhere in some museum, so we could find out what room she stayed in. She was ranting and raving, screaming, telling her mom, "Why did you force me to come to Hollywood and become a movie star? If I would have stayed, I would have ended up on Broadway. I would have been a bigger star than... I'll never make anything of myself in the films, the way they direct me, the lousy movies they give me." Anyway, so she was throwing things, ranting and raving. And her mom, she was pretty much the hustler. She was concerned that they were going to throw him out of the hotel. And so she called down to the front desk here, downstairs, and she told them if they could please send up the manager so that he could go down the hall on the same floor to tell the neighbors to stop all that ruckus and that ranting and raving to divert the trouble that Bette was creating so they wouldn't get thrown out. Okay, so her mom was desperate. She knew that they had to get out of this hotel because Bette kept on carrying on every day, throwing fits of anger, making a racket. So she got desperate, went to a real estate agent. She was actually a photographer. That's how she raised Bette and her sister Barbara, who went by Bobby. And she went to the real estate agent, asked her if she could show her some place to that she could rent, maybe a house or a bungalow maybe. And she told her that her occupation was a photographer, and she says, yeah, I got this little bungalow, it's brand new, and it was built by a director of photography, and he has all his equipment there, and it would be ideal for you and your daughter to rent. And she needed $400. I guess all the money that Bette was making at Universal, they for whatever reason they couldn't afford to move out. So she remembered that there was a family friend, the former governor of Maine, Carl Milliken. He was a family friend of her ex-husband Harlow Davis in Maine, because he grew up there in Augusta, Maine. And she knew that he played tennis every morning at the Roosevelt Hotel, a little bit west of us on Hollywood Boulevard. So she went over there and she barged in on him, and he turned around. He was discomfited. He couldn't believe it. It was Ruthie Favor Davis. He said, Ruthie, what are you doing here? She goes, oh, Governor, is there any way that you could lend me $400, because I need to get a nice place for Bette and myself? And he goes, don't you think, honey, that you should teach Bette Yankee frugalness? She goes, oh no. From first appearances, Bette must look prosperous, because, you know, Governor, she's gonna be somebody in this town someday. Wow, what an understatement. Okay, so they ended up renting a bungalow on Highland, adjacent to what is now the Hollywood Bowl, and it's still there. It's at 4435 Alta Loma Terrace, but I couldn't get in there. It's got a private gate, and they got security, but at least we can get this, at least on the outside here at the Hollywood Plaza Hotel. And they moved out to that bungalow. Now, when I told you that she got the first 3-month contract with Universal, and then they renewed it for 6 more months, she was ready to leave. She was packing up. She had had enough of Hollywood. She was going to go back and become a Broadway star. She was on her way when she left in December of 1930, and she got a call from a Warner's representative. He said, Miss Davis, he said, Mr. Arliss, George Arliss, is casting for the ingenue part in a film called The Man Who Played God. And he says that he saw you in 1929 in New York playing Hedwig in The Wild Duck, and he said that all you got to do is show up and you have the part without even having to audition. Well, at the 12th hour, she ended up going to Warner Brothers and staying 18 years. Now, George Arliss, along with Jack Warner, they gave her a raise of $400 a week. She got a raise from $300 to $400 that Universal was giving her. And they said, no, we're gonna only pay you that much until the movie's wrapped, and that's it. But when Jack Warner saw the dailies of her in The Man Who Played God, he said, I'm going to renew your contract because you have potential for 26 weeks or 6.5 months, renewable up to 5 years. Well, that 5 years turned into 18 years, and a total of 125 films in her career. So everything happened serendipitously, synchronistically, and everything happens at the right time in the right place. And it's amazing how it all happened for the beautiful, sad-eyed, lovely-eyed, at that time young, naive, but very ambitious, very, very aggressive. In fact, Ruthie, her mother, was a frustrated actress. She wanted to be an actress as a young woman, but back then her mother said, no, it's impossible, you have to marry. So what she ended up doing, Ruthie was substituting her desires in Bette's mind, imprinting in her mind, where Bette ended up having a natural talent anyway. Her mother was barely making it through when her husband and Betty's father, Harlow Morrell Davis, left them in 1918. He paid Ruthie $200 a month, but she always made sure that Betty would go to the best private schools and learn how to be an actress. She would go to all these schools that would put on countless plays, and she would enroll her in arts colonies in the summers through the 1920s and learn all these fantastic, complicated dances, a la Loy Fuller's The Serpentine Dance. She was studying under this lady named Mademoiselle Roshanara at the Mary Arden Arts Colony in 1925. And when she graduated from high school, she went to a school called the John Murray Anderson Robert Milton School of Dramatic Arts. And her mom, if it wouldn't have been for Ruthie,